Now, we're good.
Welcome everybody to the Yoga Philosophy Group from the Yoga Center of Chico. And let me introduce our speaker, Tom Hess. Tom?
Thank you, Lauren. It's a real honor to be here and help with this project that you and I have put together as a service to the community about yoga philosophy. We're talking about the Bhagavad Gita. It's an ancient text in India that has kept with current philosophical understandings all these years. It's a text that people still to this day go back to get spiritual guidance, understanding about how to live their lives. And it is within the context of a larger body of literature called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is a vast Indian epic that goes through many volumes. And the Bhagavad Gita is a small piece of it. And the Bhagavad Gita is basically a story about man's eternal struggle within himself between good and evil. And the characters and the setting of this epic are important because they give some context. They give you a level of importance as to how important these decisions that are being made are made. Okay, the characters, the main character is Arjuna. He's the prince. He's the brother of the rightful heir to the throne. But he got, the rightful heir, his brother, got usurped by Dhritarashtra, the blind king, and his son Duryodhana. So the whole conflict is because Dhritarashtra, the blind king, gave the kingdom to his son Duryodhana, where rightfully the kingdom should have gone to Yudhishthira, the brother of Arjuna. And this is the conflict. This is the big picture war. And this is these are the main characters. Now, there's only 4 characters who really speak or express themselves in the book. Dhritarashtra, the blind king, Sanjaya, and those 2 are up on a hillside overlooking this vast army. And their Sanjaya is the interpreter or the truth teller to the blind king Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya has the power to read people's minds, read people's intentions, and understand what's going on underneath it all. The other 2 characters in the text are Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna is the character who the book is serving to transform, to change his view of life. Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu, the sustainer of life. So Krishna is put on this earth then to sustain the current Dharma. Remember Dharma? We worked on these words last month. Dharma is the sustaining, that which sustains society. So when Dhritarashtra violated his Dharma by giving his son the kingdom rather than Yudhishthira, that's when the conflict began. So Krishna is here to restore the Dharma of the kingdom. Okay, some of the other characters in the text I've spoken about already. Duryodhana, he's the son of Dhritarashtra. He's the king, that is the current king, and he's on the other side of the army or the war from Arjuna and his brothers. Arjuna are the Kauravas, that group. The Pandavas are the other side, Duryodhana's army. Pandu was the father of the Pandavas, Arjuna, Yudhishthira, and the 3 other brothers, and he was the deceased king who was the brother of Dhritarashtra. And of course, this is the big dilemma. These are all cousins on both sides of the army, on both sides of the conflict, the war, and this is Arjuna's dilemma. He doesn't want to fight his kin. And he can understand, and you can understand that when you think about how dear our family members are to us, even in this current day, you can start to understand how his conscience really starts to bother him at this time. So this is his basic dilemma. I'm in this war. Okay. Krishna was he was given to Arjuna because at the beginning of before the war, the two sides of the war had a meeting and they decide, hey, Krishna told them, hey, you can either have me or you can have my army. So Duryodhana wants the army. He takes Krishna's army, and this makes his side of the army quite substantially outnumbering the Pandava side of the army, the Kauravas, which is the Duryodanas. But the prize that Arjuna gets is Krishna's advice during the battle. So this is the setting. Krishna is Arjuna's charioteer, and Arjuna tells Krishna to drive their chariot to the middle of the battlefield in between the two armies. And this is the setting. This is the physical setting with which this tale happens. So pretty much the first actions of the war is Bhishma, the grandfather of all of the cousins, and he's fighting on Duryodhana's side. So he blows his conch. Conches have great significance. They're the sea shells that you blow through that make a huge sound. So each of the warriors in this cast had their individual conches and their conch sounds. And this is their way of exhibiting. First of all, it's a way to get psyched up for the battle. It's a psychological boost because sound affects us and it inspires us, or we can become fearful from it. So they were using it as an inspirational tool. Conches are also used to locate your fellow warriors in a battle. Let's say a quarter of a mile away, my warrior buddy is over there and I want to know where he is, if he's safe, and whether we should join each other. And this is a form of communication. But more importantly, they're an effect to try to intimidate the opposition. Okay, so that's then the problem. They're fighting cousins. So Arjuna then has this dilemma: to fight or not to fight, to engage in this battle with his cousins or to not engage. It's his dharma to engage. But he looks up at his cousins and he says, how can I do this, Krishna? How can I fight my cousins? Because it would be violating the family dharma, that which sustains us all. The thing that we are fighting for, we would then be violating in that condition. And even if they want to kill me, that's no reason that I would want to kill them. And so this gives Arjuna this dilemma. Should I continue, or should I, with the warrior type life, fighting my cousins because it's my dharma, it's the right thing to do, no matter what the cost, or can I give up? This is a dilemma we all have. I remember at one time in my yoga career, back in the mid-90s, I was not very successful as a yoga teacher. I mean, by success, I mean I wasn't making much money and there was nobody in front of me. But I really had a real passion for this thing. It felt like the right thing to do. It felt like this was the reason I was here. I had had great training. I had great interest in the topic. I kept studying, but there was no fruit from it. There was nothing that I got from it except my own internal contentment. And it wasn't even that much contented at the time because I had these conflicts, but I stuck with it. And the things that got me through those times are the experience that I've had with other teachers who have entered into my life that have been inspired me. Teachers, workshops, books, videos, whatever. So it's much the same thing for Arjuna. He's in this state of despondency and he needs inspiration to break that state of despondency, which we all do. So this is one of the things that we can use in our spiritual path. When we get up to a state of despondency, of lack of faith, of not understanding where to go next, have faith that the teachers and the teachings that have come before us can light our way, and turn to them, turn to seasoned teachers and people who can really light our path going forward. So that's how this whole thing works on an internal spiritual level. But then there's also the level that Arjuna is involved with. He's in a battlefield. His job is to fight. That's his dharma in life. So you can look at this whole dilemma on two levels. You can see it as this is Arjuna's dharma to fight and to kill no matter who's in front of him. And that's his road to self-knowledge because he's fulfilled his dharma in life, and that's his reward. You can look at it on that physical, real life level, or you can look at it from the level of the internal struggle that we all have between good and evil within us. And it's an example of that battle we all have within. So the end of the chapter is Arjuna sets down his bow, he gives up, and he doesn't want to fight. That's the end of chapter 1, and I look forward to talking to you about chapter 2 in the future. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead, Lauren. I'll try to piece them together.
Okay, no problem. I think there's only a very brief interlude there. So the task at hand with the first chapter is to try to identify your war or your wars, in some cases, within. Here are some tips on how to try to do that. So each person is on their own path, and each person lives their own unique life. But there are some universal characteristics of the war within that I'll just touch on briefly here. First, as Tom has mentioned, Arjuna is playing the role in this story of the universal man. It's the everyman role. So put yourself in Arjuna's shoes, in his body, put yourself in his role. You may not be a warrior, but the beauty of this story is that you can put yourself in that place and experience what he experienced. He sees no way out, to paraphrase what Tom's talked about. He sees no way out without creating sin, without committing sin. And in fact, in my book, I counted up 10 arguments that he made against action, 10 arguments that said there is no way I can move forward unless I create a sin. And he's in an existential crisis. In other words, his whole being is becoming paralyzed and threatened. He is fighting for his spiritual life. So put yourself in, as you read this, put yourself in his place and see what you start feeling. And then listen to your internal dialogue. Oh, and then on page 80 and 82 of the ECMAF S4N version of the book, which we're using for this series, you might read what it says there. I won't read the whole thing, but on page 80 and 82, it gives you some clues. He says, my limbs grow weak, my mouth is dry, my body shakes, my hair is standing on end, my skin burns, I'm unable to stand, my mind seems to be whirling. And I'll add from my own experience, you break out in a sweat on your forehead. These are physical things that Arjuna went through. And as you put yourself in his role in the story, those kinds of physical manifestations may ring a bell with you. They may come to you as you're trying to identify your war within. The second tip is to listen to your internal dialogue. And as you read the story of Arjuna, you'll start hearing some of his language. You might try writing it down. Listen for words such as, you didn't, you shouldn't, you're worthless, I must, what if, I can't, I don't know. And some of these phrases are words that Arjuna spoke. You may want to read the chapter again to pick those up. The third is watch for the behaviors. I mentioned some of them that are listed in the story of Arjuna. He has a hard time standing. he didn't start crying, but you can imagine somebody in his situation might start crying. They might feel lethargy, which is essentially what Arjuna is feeling when he says he can't stand or he sits down. Helpless, he feels helpless. Anxiety, anger, irrational fears. Those are behaviors to look for in yourself. If you're working on identifying the war within, you may feel these things. And then lastly, like I said, each of these struggles to identify the war within and become clear and start seeing it in a conscious manner are individual. However, there's some universal, not only characteristics that I just mentioned, but some universal sources to consider. And Tom mentioned the first one, family. And this is the source of the war within for Arjuna. A couple of other classic sources. Let's go with the ever popular 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, anger, sloth. Those are some sources that may be creating this war within. Fear is my favorite. Fear of failure, fear of you're too much, blah, blah, blah. You're too big, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too whatever, dumb, not enough. Fears that you're not enough, you're not skinny enough, you're not tall enough, you're not pretty enough, you're whatever. And you start hearing these dialogues going on in your mind. My all-time favorite, Mr. Iyengar wrote in Light on Life starting on page 182, a dialogue that's classic about ice cream. So if you want to see an example of that, grab your Light on Life or somebody else's and look at starting on page 182. So in summary, the task for the first chapter is to try to identify your war within, or wars. There may be several. And as Tom said, this is the dialogue between your ego self and your higher self. And you can start hearing that dialogue go on. I would submit from my experience that identifying the war within to understand the Gita is very important. I've read it, 5 or 7 times. And until Tom said, Arjuna is the everyman and you can put yourself in his shoes, then all of a sudden it became crystal clear and made sense. And as we go through the future chapters, if you have a war within established, or you're not sure, but you think you identified one, that's fine. Then the rest of it, I hope, will make more sense for you. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I look forward to continuing this journey of yoga philosophy with you and all of the participants in the class. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next month. Bye-bye.